Week one of Set Champs is in the books. Bochum had a Ruby Amethyst mirror in the finals, and Bucky dead? Oh man, what a week for Disney Lorcana and the metagame. Can't wait to get into it today. Let's break it all down, have a small discussion about Bucky, look at some of the deck lists that were successful from the past week's set championships, and of course, in Bochum itself. Definitely some developments this week moving towards Fort Worth and beyond. Let's get into it. The Week 7 meta report consists of the top 64 decks from Bochum and any set championship that was reported of 30 or more players and the deck lists that were delivered from them. So, in that breakdown, we have 55 Emerald Steel decks, 37 Ruby Amethyst decks, 25 Sapphire Steel, 12 Ruby Sapphire, 7 Amber Steel, 5 Amber Ruby, 4 Amber Emerald, 3 Amethyst Steel, 3 Amethyst Emerald, 1 Amethyst Amber, and 1 Emerald Ruby. Some of the interesting trends here are the Ruby Sapphire deck's continuous drop off, and this was honestly a big impact from Bochum. The number of successful Ruby Sapphire decks by comparison to the number of registered Ruby Sapphire decks was very alarming for any of the Ruby Sapphire mains out there, I should say. There were 300 Ruby Sapphire registered decks, and only 4 of which were able to make the top 64, and only one of those made it to the top 32. And of course, one did inevitably make it to a top 16 as well. But the deck's overall success was very down this past weekend across many different events. Ironically, the event that I attended and that I judged, Ruby Sapphire, was the winning deck. And crazy enough, 3 of them were in the top 8. So it's not to say that Ruby Sapphire is dead by any which means, but it is very notable at the huge drop off. Seeing Sapphire Steel come in and double its success from the previous weekend to really bump itself well past Ruby Sapphire, kind of just giving you the idea of what could be happening in your local metagames and would definitely happen at the DLC, having several more than Ruby Sapphire in the top 64. No shock here that Emerald Steel was the most successful deck overall at the DLC this past weekend. 25 of them made up the top 64, which is absolutely insane. 16 of those ended up in the top 32 and 8 in the top 16. So, yes, they continuously dropped off through the event by obvious default, realistically. But the bigger shock here is that Ruby Amethyst was 20 of the top 64 decks from Bochum, 11 in the top 32, and then 5 in the top 16. And of course, 2 of them were in the finals. So the finals of the DLC was consistent of 2 Ruby Amethyst decks. We're definitely going to be looking at the winning deck here in a moment. Emerald Steel is potentially a bad matchup for Ruby Amethyst. It didn't matter. We were still able to get past it. Several Ruby Amethyst players were able to knock off Emerald Steel players in the top 64 cut at the DLC. A couple of the notables here are, the middle of the pack here. 7 Amber Steel, 5 Amber Ruby. What I can tell you about the Amber Ruby breakdowns is that 4 of those that I found were Mufasa decks, and only one of them were a location deck. So although we've saw some locations success a little bit at a 2K a couple weeks ago, definitely not a deck that's been able to follow up past that. Mufasa seems to be the better way to go for most players. Amber Emerald has now had a few different lists show up in the set championships and be successful, but realistically, still definitely struggling to find a place in the metagame. Amethyst Steel really not living up to the hype that was kind of put out there by a couple players. Only one in this top 64 of the DLC. 2 of the other ones picked up random top 8s at some reported events. So all in all, definitely not have as successful as people were thinking it was going to be. Definitely a lot going on this past week. big DLC, which is nice. It's really cool to see the data come from that. There was a lot of information that was out there, but ironically, not all the deck lists have actually even been revealed just yet, which is kind of crazy. Uh, Over on Ink Decks, they're still missing three of the top 16 decks, and let alone way more in the top 64. So it's weird to see that for us, Pro Play Games does an incredible, great job of getting the information out there for players, be able to see the top 64 breakdown really quickly, being able to see all the deck lists really quickly, kind of give everyone this ability to see what was going on in that particular event and really understand it. Not the case for the European DLC here, which is fine, but it is one of those like, hey, I would really love for to get those deck lists out there, really showcase those players that were able to be, a top 32 in 1,000-person tournament to make and give themselves an opportunity to even be successful, get their national invite or continental invite, and all those things. The trend through set championships really has felt like probably play what you're good at, because a lot of these different tournament reports that I'm seeing as I was searching through Ink Decks and really looking for these tournaments that have 30 or more players to kind of showcase that information. Because I do think that once you get to 32 players, 33 players, you are hitting 6-round tournaments. So 6-round tournaments are really a kind of a very good stat line to kind of understand exactly how good a deck can be or, isn't. Once you hit 6 rounds, once you hit a top 8, you're talking about, in this event where we're almost always playing until the finals because we're playing for a champion playmat, we're playing for an Ursula, so we're definitely playing it out as long as possible. You're talking about 9-round tournaments on average that a deck has to be successful in. That's why we do and say 30 or more players, because those are the kind of stats that you're getting from a 30 or more player tournament rather than below where it's only like 4 rounds or 5 rounds. It's kind of like just maybe on average not enough information to really showcase it. Also, maybe not enough really good players in a small room to really identify whether or not it's the deck or the player. That's definitely why we break down the stats the way we do on this channel. With all that being said, Ruby Amethyst took another leap here, really, showcasing that it might be the most dominant deck in the game, having a really good showing across the board in set championships, having a phenomenal showing at the DLC. So definitely saying, hey, look at me. Emerald Steel is and was the most dominant deck, though. It did have nearly 20 more top cut finishes than any other deck in the metagame, but we did get a huge Bucky announcement. Kind of insane, really, like having the first Errata in the game. We're going to talk about it very shortly on this video here and just give it like a brief thing of maybe cause and effect. But hey, let's get into some deck lists today. Let's check out the winning deck list from DLc Bochum. The Lorcana European Challenge Bochum first place finish played by Theodime. This was honestly a really fun run to watch. I was able to watch all of the top 64 cut played out on that Sunday. And when played well, it shows that, player skill really does matter. Understanding your matchups, understanding what Ruby Amethyst can do for you in different matchups, and all of the versions of this deck can be played. We used to live in a world where Mini Surfer and Spellbooks were kind of the way to play through the mirror matches. They were kind of a way to cheese out Ruby Sapphire decks. And really what ended up happening here is that a Flynn Rider just came in out of nowhere and just changed the game so much and allowed for Ruby Amethyst to really have burst starts that weren't required to play, bad uninkables in your deck like the Spellbook. The line of Flynn Rider into Sisu, into Queen's Castle just has the ability to just say, hey, I'm going to gain 10 to 14 lore on 3 cards in my deck. The rest of my cards all basically read banish target character. So you just have to have like so many extraordinary ways to get back into the game. And it's really difficult. Ruby Amethyst is one of the best closers in the format. And of course, at any given moment, Goat plus Snake or plus Fox is just another 3 lore that you can just pick up at any given time later in the game. The draw power is just surreal in this deck. Chernobog's followers, friends on the other side, Rabbit, Sorcerer, Castle, all of them read draw cards, and it's really what the deck does. It puts out burst the early damage through Flynn Rider, draws cards that replace themselves consistently, keep its hand healthy, and then all of the red cards, or I should say most of the red cards in this deck, just read banish target character. And yeah, it's really doing everything. Of course, the tech card of choice for this particular list was Peter Pan. And honestly, I think the 3 cost Peter Pan is a card that the deck doesn't even need, but it really is showcasing that the last 2 to 5 to 6 or 7 cards in this list are very interchangeable. They're very just like, hey, what card do I want on this given day? We saw lists that had Crab again this weekend. Peter Pan is here. We've seen Minnie Mouses. We've seen the 2 cost Pegasus with evasive. We're just going to constantly keep seeing these different, final cards of this deck, basically just based on choice. The Peter Pan is obviously just like the best way I would say that you can remove Diablo via a character challenge. I think that playing Magic Carpet or playing the Ruby Pegasus, like, yeah, these cards are great because they're cost efficient, they are inkable. But, when we live in a world where we're trying to remove Diablos, against the Emerald Steel deck, you can't rely on a character still being in play to ever even challenge a Diablo. So therefore, relying on Peter Pan with Rush is definitely a little more efficient of a way to kind of like remove it through challenging if that's what you have to do. But realistically, Brawl is on average the best overall answer for Diablo. I would look at Peter Pan, in all honesty, as basically Brawl 5 and 6 in most cases. But he is coming at the cost of an uninkable. So you can see this list doesn't have any Lady Trimmings, which is huge. It's the decision that was made, and in the end, it definitely picked him up a first place finish at the 1,900 plus player tournament. When it's all said and done, yes, the way the tournament was run, it was 2,000 player tournaments that broke down into 164 player top cut. But hey, in the end, Theo got there. Congratulations to him. Very well played. It was really, really fun to watch his games that he was on stream on Sunday. Sapphire Steel finished in the top 4 of the European Challenge this past weekend. Justin probably had one of my favorite moments on stream. There was a couple games there in the top 4 where, double dime off the top picks up a win. It nearly picks up a win in the third game of the set. And there was just a lot of smiles, a lot of laughs. Justin seemed like a really great character. Justin really seemed like a great opponent for all. He was very fun on stream. Lots of smiles, lots of giggles, lots of laughs. It was very enjoyable to watch him play and really just see that he was very much enjoying the atmosphere of Bochum and the Disney Lorcana experience as a whole. And this deck really brought in a couple interesting choices we haven't seen recently. Seeing Scuttle back in these decks really, it's just a 2 cost 1/3 inkable, and when it comes into play, it finds you an item. I don't know how often Scuttle was successful on the day. A lot of times, it ended up being a card that we really didn't want in our deck list anymore because it just didn't impact the game enough. Even when you hit an item, the 1/3 just was like not great into Flynn Rider decks. So it was like always like a meh. Fire the Cannons is a great choice here. I think that that's one of the more underutilized cards in the game right now. Sapphire Steel does enable you to play quite a fair bit of uninkables when you're committed to Fishbone Quills and things like that. So playing a 1 cost, do 2 damage to chosen character that's uninkable sounds kind of crazy, but in a game where you're just like, man, I really need to remove Flynn Rider, I really need to remove Diablo, and I need to do that as soon as possible before they gain too much advantage out of it. Having a 1 cost removal is an outstanding way to do that. The other really interesting fact here is that we have Beast Tragic Hero in this list. It's not a character that is normally seen play in Sapphire Steel. Generally, on average, they have plenty of other ways to draw cards consistently, buy popsicles, Fortispheres, High Rim, a whole new world, just the plethora of ways to really draw cards. So adding the beast here was just another way. And I think really what the beast did is that in the games where you don't want to play a whole new world, it's more or less adding Hyrims to your deck. And it's definitely a card that most opponents probably didn't expect to see. So they weren't necessarily prepared to play against a Beast Tragic Hero in a Sapphire Steel lineup. I guarantee the card drew plenty of cards throughout the weekend, just because opponents maybe inked the answer to it in game one or the first game they had seen it. You could also hide it pretty well with Fishbone Quills. So you don't have to let your opponent even know you're on them. So there's definitely a lot of mind games there thanks to Fishbone Quill. And I'm sure that Beast Tragic Hero ended up being a pretty consistent card throughout the weekend. All in all, Sapphire Steel really moved up the ranks, having 25 top cut finishes this past weekend, but none better than a top 4 finish at the DLC. So congratulations again to Justin. You definitely made me laugh a couple times watching the stream and just kind of like your natural reactions to the game. So huge shout out to you, sir. And again, congratulations. Ruby Sapphire over the last several weeks honestly has started to fall off a ton in the Lorcana metagame. It's a very clearly powerful deck. The problem with it right now is that its matchup against Ruby Amethyst, which is on the rise and trending up and just won a DLC, is just abysmal. It is so difficult for this deck to be successful in the Ruby Amethyst matchup. You can see here there are several changes being made. We've also seen other changes being made in these decks. We're now seeing Scar come back. We're seeing Hercules be played. It's these hardcore changes that you have to go through to even attempt to make it work. But the crazy thing about cards like Hercules, obviously Hercules trades up 1-for-1 with Castle, which is wonderful. It's definitely something you kind of need to do in this because every single time you give your opponent an opportunity to gain 2 more lore from Castle, it puts them just that much closer to winning, and it takes a lot longer for your deck to kind of set up to win. So on average, the Ruby Sapphire deck is trying to play this game where it's controlling the board over and over and over again, and then finally like chipping away over like a course of 3 or 4 turns with Dime and whatever big thing we have. Sometimes it takes longer than 4 turns, if I'm being honest, though. So really, it's like, hey, I'm gonna ramp, control, and then start trying to turn the tides and finally win the game. The problem is that against Ruby Amethyst, the ramp lines aren't good enough. You're just giving them way too much opportunity to just go gain 3 lore, gain 3 lore, gain 2, gain 2, game 1, gain 2, pressure the board now through other means, and then you just fall out of favor in the game really quickly. So while the deck has phenomenal game into a lot of the steel decks in the metagame, it's really just not true against the Ruby Amethyst matchup. In all honesty, against a lot of the more aggro matchups in the game. So because of that, it's definitely been more difficult. It's definitely just been less successful overall. But this particular list has some really cool cards in it. So we do have Gaston returning, not a card we see too often out of Ruby Sapphire. We see the return of Scar here. Scar was a card that was very dominant in the Into the Inklands metagame. It even turned into where Ruby Amethyst started playing a couple of these, but Ruby Sapphire was very much in need of the Scar against Ruby Amethyst matchups that were just going wide with a bunch of little characters. Scar was able to come in, kind of make a 3-for-1 or a 4-for-1 trade in some cases if we have Popsicle, which is more of a 4-for-2, but it has the ability to like really damage and remove the board so you don't have to be prepared. The other addition here is the uninkable Sisu, 3 cost, 1/1 evasive, 1 lore, and when it comes into play, you can banish a character with 1 strength or less. Comboing with Ice Block, it definitely gives you a few answers, additional answers to cards like Flynn Rider and cards like Diablo. The issue, of course, is that like you need Ice Block and you need Sisu early on to really get that turned on quick enough for it to matter. But hey, definitely different, interesting route. Maui's Hook makes a return as well. I do think Maui's Hook is probably a necessity in this deck right now. Its issues with evasive really have come up. Its issues with locations are definitely starting to damage it. So what's probably starting to happen here is that, in my humble opinion, Ruby Sapphire was probably the most dominant deck early, where it just was like, hey, my stock list is better than everyone else's stock list. And definitely in a world where Ruby Amethyst was like unplayable for a little while there, where people were just like, oh, we can't contend with Emerald Steel. There's just not a way to figure it out. It's not worth it. After it was figured out by a couple different players and a couple different teams that Ruby Amethyst wasn't necessarily dead in the water. You just had to drastically change your playstyle on Emerald Steel. It turned out to be Ruby Amethyst was a real contender in the metagame. The moment that happened, Ruby Sapphire was in trouble because really what it did is that it opened up the door for other decks to figure out what their route is to win against Ruby Sapphire. And now Ruby Sapphire went from a stock deck that was just powerful to a deck that has to play its own tech cards. And by doing that, it's kind of diluting the natural strategy of the deck. And that's where I think we're starting to get worried about what this is really going on here and the overall potential success in general of Ruby Sapphire. We'll see if it can adapt. We'll see if it can come back. In Chicago, it was the most successful deck, but from Chicago to Bochum, it has really fallen out of favor. I'm not exactly sure at this point if I would be bringing this to a set champs. Maybe a set champs is fine. If you think there's only a few Ruby Amethyst decks in the room and you're confident in your play against everything else, maybe it's okay to deck. Like I said, the event that I judged this past weekend, Top Deck Games, shout out the Top Deck, had 3 Ruby Sapphires in the top 8. So it's not to say the deck is dead. That was a 56-player tournament too. It wasn't like it was a small event. Like there were 9 Ruby Amethyst decks in the room, but yeah, Ruby Sapphire was still able to find his way into 3 slots in the top 8, and there were no Ruby Amethyst in that top 8 also. So interesting breakdown. I posted on the socials, but it is to say, like, listen, the deck's not dead. I just do think it's maybe potentially going through this revamp phase of trying to figure out its best 60 cards, where a few weeks ago that was a little more clear. I just think that this deck is finally seeing and needing a development, or maybe just a little bit of like a revamp in some ways. We'll see how it does in Fort Worth, and of course over the next few weekends in set champs as well. Emerald Steel was the most successful deck on the weekend, having over 55 top contending decks. This deck in particular was the top 8 of the Lorcana European Challenge in Bochum. The Bucky with Rabbits is the name. In all honesty, this is a deck that I think we've continuously seen over and over again. The success of it is there. And it's really one of those, if it's not broke, don't fix it. This list is, I believe, an exact replica of the Rats list from Chicago that was the winning list. So it's very clear that, hey, this deck is very good. It's very powerful. It's doing everything that you want it to do. And it's very incredibly consistent if you're willing to just make the mulligans that are required for this deck to be consistent. It's the menace of the metagame. It's the boogeyman in the metagame. I'm sure a lot of players that have sat down across from this list has felt it to be probably one of the most miserable play experiences in Disney Lorcana. And it's all because of a cute little itty bitty squirrel named Bucky. So, of course, the shout out to our top 8 player here. Huge success picking up the Mickey Mouse, picking up an invite to Continentals. Really just showcasing again that the strength of Emerald Steel isn't going anywhere. And the line of Bucky into Floodborns with Diablos, drawing you cards, with some of the best characters in the game, in the form of Beast, in the form of Robin, Ursula, the closing potential of Flynn Rider, the controlling items of Aladdin, Cove, really representing increase in problematics for some of the removal for your cards in your deck. Like, this deck just has an incredibly difficult line of synergy to compete against, and it fires on all cylinders. And honestly, it's just over and over again clearing that it's very much the most dominant deck in the metagame in Ursula's return. However, it honestly, in the end, was too dominant. Bucky, the Squirrel Squeak Tutor, was errated this week. That's kind of crazy to say. It is our, first official errata in Disney Lorcana. But it happens. We got there, guys. Like, the negative play experience from Bucky honestly finally put us in a position where Ravensburger felt the need that they had to make a change. They didn't want to spend, I guess, really the rest of Disney Lorcana at the fear of this 2-cost warded character being a nuisance to the play experience at Disney Lorcana. And I think that's what really most people need to understand here is that it wasn't that Bucky was too powerful. It really was that Bucky was playing a game that no one else got to play, and it made the games really unfun for the majority of players. Most cases in games, casual players will be the ones that are the cry and like the biggest complaint. They go like, "Oh, I can't believe you're playing Emerald Steel today. Like it's not fun. I don't know why you're playing it." This is the first time I think in a very long time in any card game I've ever played where it was pretty much unanimous between competitive and casual that Bucky was miserable. Like Emerald Steel deck is a miserable deck to play against. You have to like mold and craft your deck in such a way that it's so very difficult to like even give yourself a chance, or you have to play this game that is just like not even a fun experience for either player if we're being honest. And I think that that's really what Bucky was presenting, and that's the reason why Bucky got changed. Let's take a quick look at this effective change for Bucky. So Bucky, instead of being a 2-cost inkable 1/1 with Ward and its ability Squeak, which was whenever you play a fun Floodborn, your opponent must choose and discard a card. It is now a 3-cost inkable, 1 strength, 1 lore, 1 willpower with the ability still of Squeak, but whenever you play a Floodborn character, if you used Shift to play them, each opponent chooses and discard a card. Now, there's a couple things that I think are important to layer this out. One, obviously we went to a bump in cost. That's huge. Two, we removed Ward. Also huge. Three, we changed the line of text to be in line with more cards that we have seen revealed in Disney Lorcana, in all honesty. There are several cards in the game now that says, when you shift this, you do the thing. In set one, some of the best cards in the game, as an example, Tinkerbell, Great Fairy, when she comes in, she does her damage, and then she has an additional ability. You don't have to shift her. Great. The Beast is another one. Like we don't have to shift Beast to interact or do any targets, but he's a Floodborn character, so all those things. Robin Hood, it's not the turn that you shift him; it's a passive line. But there are newer cards in the game that like when you shift, you draw cards and things like that. So like it was definitely a development in text that I think happened through the design process of Disney Lorcana, where as we got into the Inklands, as we got into Ursula's Return, we saw it more and more that they were trying to promote the shift line instead of just playing Floodborn characters. And I think a lot of that had to do with cards like Blue Fairy, with cards like Bucky. These are two of the more dominant Floodborn Matters characters. So when you look at Bucky and you see this line changed, I think there's a world where if they could, they would go back and they would change all of the Floodborn Matters characters to this particular line. There's even a world where they would change cards like Tinkerbell to this particular line as well, kind of forcing you into playing specific play lines. Obviously, it makes all those cards worse. This change to this card makes this card significantly worse, but it is in line with some of the game text in the game. It's not like it's some crazy thing that we're not seeing for the first time. It is just like a more updated version of what this card could look like. Could we argue that, hey, all they had to do was change the line to this and it would have been fine? Bucky wouldn't have been as a menace. Sure. Could we argue that by removing Ward, same argument? Could we like also say, oh, they bumped to 3 costs? It's the same argument. Yeah, they could have done any one of those 3 things and made Bucky worse. But what the really underlying story here is, guys, is that Bucky was a negative play experience at Disney Lorcana. If they only make one of those changes and he remains to be a negative play experience at Disney Lorcana, then they miss the purpose of the change. Like, yes, you could have made the card worse, but if you make the card worse and it's still playable, it still is leaving the negative play experience, which is what we don't want, right? Like the players weren't complaining about the power of Bucky, they were complaining about the experience of Bucky. Therefore, you see a world where it gets bumped in cost, it gets removed a keyword, it gets changed and altered the ability. You see all these 3 things happens because effectively what they tried to do is they tried to make this card as unplayable as possible so there is no negative play experience. And I know the ultimate question is, why didn't they ban it? Guys, Ravensburger has to run every single thing they do through Disney. The mouse has all the power. And in the end, I'm certain that the mouse said, no, we don't want to ban cards right now. We don't want to ban that card. It also has a promo card. Like, we don't want to ban this card. Therefore, in their own modified way, once they were allowed to errata the card, they said, okay, well, if we can't ban the card, we're going to errata the card to as close as unplayable as possible. Therefore, removing the negative play experience from Bucky. That's my opinion. You can let me know in the comments if you like the Bucky line, if if you think it's too much, whatever it is. I personally just think that they weren't allowed to ban it, so they just made it as unplayable as possible to do their best effort to remove the negative play experience of Bucky, to have a more healthy game for them moving beyond. It also does create a really awesome tournament for Toronto. I'm going to cover all this in a few weeks after Fort Worth and really discuss the true ramifications of this card and all of the changes in the metagame potentially from it. So for now, goodbye, Bucky. Bon voyage. I will not miss you one bit. Thumbs up from the George, because I'm sure he's just as exuberant as I am about the removal. The cards suck to play against, guys, straight up. Let's get into more deck list. Okay, so we got through the top 4 decks, and now we finally start hitting some of the amber decks in the field. And what I wanted to say that I thought was very interesting, it was like really a specific stat line from Bochum, is that there was 255 amber decks. 255 amber decks that were registered in the 2000 or near 2000 player tournament. And of those amber decks, only 2 total amber decks made top 64, which is 0.8% conversion rate for amber decks in the DLCs. Guys, amber's in trouble. it's it's in trouble. Right now, the success rate of that ink is just like unbelievably abysmal. It's kind of crazy, but let's take a look at some of the amber decks. It wouldn't be a meta report without Dick Burns. I said it again, guys, because it's true. Dick Burns picked up not 1, but 2 stitches this past weekend playing Amber Steel. And in all honesty, guys, this deck looks incredibly familiar. Want to know why? Because it was the first place deck at the end of DLC Chicago Swiss. Zach Bibbins played this exact 60 cards to a first place finish in DLC, finished in the top 32, missing his top 16, but still inevitably getting an invite passed down through the system in the DLC for his Nationals invite. Amber Steel, really great deck. If you are an Amber Steel player, you understand how to play this deck. You really can kind of develop a way to play it against Sapphire decks. Then this is a great deck to bring to set championships. I think it has game into everything. I think it clears away all of the budget aggro decks that you see trying to pick up random wins against Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Amethyst. Amber Steel cleans those decks up so very well. It has game in Emerald Steel. It has almost free wins in the Ruby Amethyst. I swear, if you ask me, I think it's a 95-5 matchup. I think the Ruby Amethyst players have to pray to whatever the gods that they have to in order for you to draw incredibly poorly at every turn of the game. And the Sapphire matchups aren't unwinnable. No, they're not favorable, right? They're not favorable straight up. You can definitely lose any Sapphire deck in the game, but they're not unwinnable either, which is why I think Amber Steel, in the hands of the best Amber Steel players that really understand this deck ins and outs, understand everything and every decision point, because that's, guys, I've been saying this for literally a year now almost. Amber Steel is one of the most difficult decks in the game to play successfully, even though it has won so many tournaments in the Lorcana existence. Its top 8 ratios since set 1 have always dropped down because the deck has become more and more difficult to play, more and more decision points. And because of that, I think it doesn't get the limelight that it really truly deserves. But honestly, if you are a diehard Amber Steel player and you haven't played this deck in a while, I really do suggest, hey, go play some games with this deck. It's very good, it's very powerful, it's very well positioned in the metagame in a world where Ruby Amethyst is on the rise as well. So don't look or overpass this deck just because it's a low success rate over the course first month. I do think this is a potential rogue deck that can really come in and be successful in set championships and beyond moving forward. My tip to you, if you haven't in a while, if you're a really good a whole new world player and you miss the card, then like you should just guys give the deck a chance. You never ever know what's going to happen. I think that it really is and has a lot of potential in the Disney Lorcana metagame. Emerald Amber picked up 4 top cut finishes this past weekend. And this particular event, we finished second place. We're calling it the Amber Emerald Discard Songs deck. You can definitely see a record player in this deck, which is crazy. Under the Sea is the key component. Anyone that hasn't played against this deck or hasn't played with this deck, in my opinion, it's one of the most fun decks to play in Disney Lorcana. And this might be a bit of a hot take, so we'll discuss it a little bit here, but I think that this deck might be the best control deck in Disney Lorcana. However, I know, crazy. You can flame me in the comments. It's fine. The problem with this deck is that it doesn't have Queen's Castle. It doesn't have Lucky Dime. Because it doesn't have Queen's Castle, because it doesn't have Lucky Dime, because it doesn't have goats, like it doesn't have an actual way to win a game of Disney Lorcana. It has every ability in the world to control the game for like 10 plus turns. It legitimately can just consistently, like over and over again, have the same lines, remove opponent's characters from the board, just on repeat over and over. But every single time you do that, you're never advancing your board. You're never gaining lore. There was a game on stream a couple weeks ago. It was played by Ryan Miles and our teammate Ben. And Ryan, like he controlled 99% of the game, and then end up losing to triple a whole new world to get milled out because he just couldn't actually win the game. It's one of those things where like this deck really has a lot of potential. And in all honesty, it might get a little bit better with the Bucky removal, something we'll talk about in another video. But this deck really does struggle to win games at Disney Lorcana, and it is one of those where like this deck is really fun, but it's also really difficult. You have to sequence things in a very proper order to make sure everything goes as planned. You Have Forgotten Me is a card that really punishes opponents, specifically when they're just not ready for it. If you can set up a Ursula sing sudden chill into a You Have Forgotten Me, the game just kind of ends on the spot. So like it's one of those decks where it just removes all resources from your opponent, and it really like removes their ability that they shouldn't be able to win. But because of how most decks can just kind of draw out, you have rabbits, you have high rims, you have Bucky that puts like characters like Beast into play, where you don't have like great answers to that either. You have to like double, play cards like Paint the Roses or Lost in the Woods to try and remove those things. So like you get put in this position where you feel like you're in control and you're in the driver's seat, and then you do that for so many turns and you realize like, hey, I just spent the last 5 turns removing every character my opponent played, but I only gained 2 lore. That's the problem. This deck is missing a key component, and I believe in the end it's by design. If this deck was the best deck in the metagame, we would probably hate it a lot more than we hate Bucky, if I'm being honest. So it's probably a very healthy thing that like the top versions of this deck haven't really found a way to be truly successful in that manner yet. But it is a deck that I do expect people to continuously work on and try and figure out if there is some version of this deck that can be consistent enough against the majority of the metagame to really showcase like the true control aspect of it. Amber, Ruby, Mufasa kind of coming back, picking up some top finishes in this past weekend of Ursula set champs. There was 0 of these in the top 64 of the DLC past weekend. So all of the finishes from this weekend do come at the cost of set championships. 30 or more players is still, a successful day for a deck like this. Some of the cool things that I think we're seeing in this particular list is the Ruby Stitch coming back, which is the 6 cost 4/6 with 3 lore. That's a card we haven't seen in a while. It did get some love in previous, Amber Ruby decks of the past. I'm not sure if it was ever really a mainstay in Mufasa decks, but it's a 3 lore character. It dodges Medusa. It dodges a long game Zeus, so it has all the right stat lines and the right way to pressure a game. So I think that's pretty cool. Obviously, the big willpower is great for Rapunzel as well, and even Julieta in this deck. Sisu as a one of in both categories. We have the gigantic, Floodborn Sisu, and then we have the baby Sisu that's removing characters. We have the three brawls, so we are committed to playing a couple actions here in our Mufasa deck. All in all, I think this deck is one of those pretty straightforward decks to play in Disney Lorcana. It's very like user friendly, I believe. So if you're looking for a friend that's just like trying to get into Lorcana and you have the ability to just hand him a deck, I think Mufasa is a pretty great deck to hand over to someone, if I'm being completely honest. This past weekend was an incredibly successful weekend for Team TFM. And here is just 6 photos of some of our team winning Ursulas and winning tournaments. Dick Burns was able to go 2 for 2 this past weekend. Scott went 1 for 1. Pave went 1 for 2, but also making a top 8. Matt was able to pick up a top 8. Colby was picking up a top 4. Ben picked up a top 4. Dave picked up a finals. I was really just showcasing a lot of the Ursula pictures. Some of the team unfortunately had to play in tournaments that didn't get their Ursulas yet, which is like really unfortunate. Like the 4th of July holiday kind of stinted some of the deliveries, which it does suck, but it does happen. I'm sure the stores, feel pretty bad about it, and they're going to get the cards to everybody. But in the description below is a survey to a set championship survey that I'm going to be utilizing at the last week before the final weekend of set championships, kind of just utilizing some of the information of what people were deciding on, how that was good, maybe if people predicted the meta correct. I think that the set championships being a month long is like incredibly interesting because we're going to see true local developments. You're probably going to go to a lot of the same tournaments as a lot of the same players in your area, all traveling like, hey, maybe they traveled 90 minutes to play in your store, which means you're going to travel 90 minutes to play in their store. Maybe you're even going a little further, 2.5 hours, depending on how big your area is, or I should say how secluded your area is with stores. For me in Philadelphia, there's only 3 stores in Philadelphia itself that are hosting set champs. So I have to go out to Greater Philadelphia, I have to go to Jersey, to Delaware, to Western PA if I want to. So I have to travel a little bit to play in these Lorcana set championships. And I think that's really interesting because you're going to see these players that, they came to my store. Now I'm going to go to their store. And you're going to learn some of the local metagames. And by the time we get to week 4, you're probably going to be able to make your best educated decision on what that week 4 metagame looks like in your local areas. So, if you want to be a part of the Set Champ survey and kind of like a real fun video I plan on doing at the end of the month, definitely look in the description below and hit it up. But if you're looking to win a stitch, guys, Team TFM crushed it this past weekend. We have different guides going on the Patreon. We did a whole Set Champs boot camp last weekend, or a couple weekends ago now. All those videos are going to start to come out. There was a video that came out last week. But honestly, we're going to start a new TFM channel. So I'm going to put a link to it in the description below today. It doesn't have any videos on it yet, but it's where we're going to dump all of our gameplay videos from the Set Champs boot camps and also from any of the events that I cast or I host. We're going to put those gameplay videos there as well. So if you're only looking for gameplay through my voice as a caster or Dick Burns' voice as a caster, or some of the set champs and live streams that we do, all that gameplay is going to be on a secondary channel that I'm going to put a link to in the description below. It's just an easier place for us to kind of put gameplay, and I think where it'll be easier for more people to find in a playlist and all those things like that. I'd love to know how you did, in your set championships this weekend. I didn't get to play in one. I did officially judge my first tournament. I was like an actual official judge. Finally, I was able to access the melee and kind of help people make a couple rulings, some time extensions. I did award a game loss. I know I'm a villain. I'm the worst. But yeah, so it was a fun weekend, a fun experience for me to kind of be on that side of the table. I've never been one that wanted to be a judge in any way, but my store was kind of in need of a person to step up. For me, the community as a whole, it's way more important for my store to have a successful 56 player tournament than it is for me to play in the tournament and try and win. I believe the overall growth of Disney Lorcana is way more important than like my one person player success. So for me, it was a very like no brainer decision to say, oh, it's fine. I don't need to play today. I want to make sure that every person here today is enjoying themselves, having a good run, fluent event. And that's why I decided to step aside that day. I was supposed to play on Sunday at the encounter, but I woke up to a flat tire in my car, and that sucked also. But hey, such is life. Stayed home that day, got to watch the DLC live stream, and enjoy that, for all that it was worth. But again, if you are looking to be successful, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you're playing. If you're looking to get a little bit more information, a little bit behind the curtains, and you should check out our Patreon. We have a specific Discord room for patrons where we kind of talk through all of the decks they're playing, kind of walk through the strategy that's going on and trying to set themselves up for success in Disney Lorcana challenges. I also have a coaching tier. It currently is actually full. We did sell out the tier, but we might be opening more up soon. If you are looking for that, definitely hit me up in the comments below. If you're looking for more coaching, then there's a chance that we can kind of open up more coaching tiers. I'm actually like overbooked right now, but there might be more TFM members that are interested in doing it as well. So if you're interested in coaching from a team TFM, check it out below. If you're really just looking to get into a private conversation with Team TFM and into the room with us, you should definitely check out the Patreon tiers as well. Thank you guys so much for watching today. Hope the information was good. I will catch you in the next one.